Did you know that George Washington was the 8th president? Can you name the state of the Union that was named after Benjamin Franklin? I bet you can't. Or did you know that Charlemagne held the throne for 400 years? Or did you know that a football game can be won by a score of 1-0? Welcome back. I'm John Hix, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hix, who created Strange As It Seems in the late 1920s. Recently, I've done a number of episodes on the greatest hits of Strange As It Seems that my grandmother Elsie had compiled right around 1960. Sort of as she was winding down from managing and really running the Strange As It Seems brand for, maybe 14, 15 years at that point. But the first greatest hits of the Strange As It Seems brand was actually compiled in the very first book that John Hix published. And it looks like the first version, I think, was published in 1928. I found a couple of copies of it. It doesn't have a year in it. It was printed by looks like in London by Stanley Paul and Company at the Gainsborough Press, St. Albans. But the second edition, which it looks like it came out at least in 1931, showed that there was a copyright of 1928, 1929, 1930, and 1931. So this is where I got the sense that Strange As It Seems started around 1928. It looks like the comic strip got going in 1929, but maybe even as early as 1928. And then I found this version with a cover on it, the second printing of the Strange As It Seems book from 1931, with a lot of these strange and unusual facts on the inside cover that John Hix used to carry with him when he'd go out and get the syndication. Things like, a farmer was father of one president and son of another. Your piano is not in tune. Uncle Sam was born before the United States. Crazy. Cleopatra was a Greek. And Mother Goose actually lived. Strange and unusual facts that he compiled in this book. And I thought today I would go through and highlight some of these wonderful, strange, and unusual stories, some of which you may have heard before in previous episodes, but that were compiled in the very first Strange As It Seems book by John Hix. First off, I love this cover. He has the human horse story, which was the first story shown in the book, and I think one of the very earliest. In fact, it might have been the very first comic strip that John Hix published was about the human horse. But on the back, I love this too. Strange As It Seems is in the movies. And this was really, it's Carl Laemmle and Universal are sending cameramen to the four corners of the earth to record for the screen in color and sound the strange happenings, oddities of nature, and curiosities of all kinds that John Hix has depicted with his pen. I have yet to be able to find any of these old Columbia films. I've been reaching out to Universal for years, have many contacts there. I found a couple of people that remember having them in their aunt's basement. So if you know of anyone that happens to have old films and we can find any of these, I think a lot of them are on nitrate, which might be a little dangerous to be having around the house because obviously if one of those catches on fire, the whole house goes with it. I have found some of the Columbia pictures, films from 1937, and I've uploaded those here at the YouTube channel. But still digging, still trying to find archives as we go. But for today, let's take a look at the Strange As It Seems book that John Hix published in 1928 with the second edition in 1931. And of course, the first story that was kind of a poignant story that John Hix published on day one of Strange As It Seems about George Asher of Joplin, Missouri. He not only acted and lived like a horse, but he believed himself superior to any horse living. So strong was Asher's desire to look and act like a horse that he wore his haircut to resemble a mane, his shoes shod with heavy horseshoes, and he had a special harness made which he pulled a wagon along in his travels. And in his prime, he entered strength contests against other quadrupeds. Although his diet did not consist entirely of horse feed, Asher did eat hay, grass, bran, and oats. And sadly, he died in Kansas City, penniless and almost friendless, at the age of 60 on March 3rd, 1928. And here on page 23, we have the world's fastest human. Fascinating. R.P. Williams apparently ran the 100 yards in 9 seconds. And to date, that would still be a world record. I think the fastest 100-yard dash right now is about 9.3 seconds. And of course, they moved on to meters, right? The 100-meter dash is now the standard for Olympics and for world racing. But it was really an incredible story. And I dug back in, and it was said in 1906 that R.P. Williams was asked to run an exhibition 100-yard dash. And on a truly measured track against absolutely perfect watches on June 2nd, 1906, he ran the 100-yard dash in 9 seconds. So technically, although it was not measured as it has been since by scientific calculations, still may be the fastest man to ever run the 100-yard dash. R.P. Williams, strange as it seems. And I remember reading this one when I was a kid. It always struck me as odd, the deck of cards as it relates to a calendar. I've really never heard an explanation, but there are 52 cards in a deck and 52 weeks in a year. There are 12 picture cards in a deck, there are 12 months in a year. There are 4 suits in a deck and 4 seasons in a year. There are 13 tricks in a deck and 13 weeks in a quarter. And the number of the cards in a deck total 365, and there are 365 days in a year. Never really knew why, but always thought that was really an interesting correlation between a deck of cards and the calendar. And another really interesting one here, Mary Ann Smith of London. She earns her living as a pea shooter. Go figure. She can without a doubt lay claim to having the most novel way of earning a livelihood. As a professional pea shooter, Mrs. Smith shoots peas at window panes to arouse those who have to begin their labor early in the morning. The Smiths reside in the Limehouse district of London, in a neighborhood where many of the residents cannot afford the luxury of an alarm clock. And that's where the pea shooter comes in handy. She arises each morning at 3:30 a.m. and starts on her route, shooting peas against the window panes of her customers until they awaken, shove their heads out the window, and cry, "Nuff!" For this service, she charges a few pennies a week. Or this story about the $1 million comma. A misplaced comma, probably the most expensive punctuation mark in the world, deprived the U.S. of $1 million in revenue. The framers of the Tariff Act of June 6, 1872, intended to include in the free list fruit plants, tropical and semi-tropical, for the purpose of propagation or cultivation. But in copying the bill, the clerk misplaced the comma, making it read fruit, plants tropical, that comma between fruit and plants, and semi-tropical for the purpose of propagation or cultivation. It was contended by importers that under the law, all tropical and semi-tropical fruit were then exempt from duty. After ruling against the contention, the Treasury Department reversed its decision and refunded most of the money that had been collected. The error in punctuation was corrected in subsequent tariff acts, but amazingly so, it made the provision read, as it originally intended, and about $1 million in revenue was refunded by the U.S. government. Or how about these? The doctor ants carried in first aid kits in equatorial South America. When stitches are to be taken in a wound, large biting ants are allowed to bite the edges together, then their bodies are snapped off, leaving the head with the jaws in a death grip until the wound is healed. Doctor ants. Or this one, fighting with bricks in the clouds. I love this. In the early days of the World War, keep in mind, this was before World War II happened, so they called World War I the World War. French aviators carried as part of their regular equipment a bag of bricks. Machine guns, at this time, obviously weren't used in planes, for the problem of firing rapidly through the propeller blades had yet to be solved. So the bricks were carried that in the hope of close fighting, a pilot might be able to hurl one into the propeller of the enemy's plane. And in fact, there are records of 2 German machines that were actually brought down in the World War in this manner. And here's one of those interesting quantum physics, in the beginning of quantum physics, where people really started to grapple with some of the amazing facts coming out about the quantum and in the microscopic world, right? An ordinary glass tumbler could hold all the people of the earth. Were it possible to compress the material substance of the human body into its actual size, the largest man would be a small speck. This is from A.S. Eddington in his book, The Nature of the Physical World, which came out. And he said, if we eliminated all the unfilled space in a man's body, collected all of his protons and electrons into one mass, the man would be reduced to a speck, just visible with a magnifying glass. Eddington goes on to explain that even as solid an object as a bar of metal, there's more emptiness than actual metal. He says that even in an atom, the smallest particle of matter is as porous as the entire solar system. Crazy. Still amazing. We all kind of know this even to this day, but still an amazing fact here in 1928. Did you know that the word dunce comes from the name of one of the greatest thinkers of the Middle Ages? The word dunce, which was used more at that time than today, but to describe a person who's weak in intellect, it was derived from the name of John Duns Scotus, one of the greatest thinkers of the Middle Ages. Scotus, born in Duns, Scotland in 1265, he was called the subtle doctor, became one of the greatest of British medieval philosophers. A Duns man, or dunce, was the name bestowed on the followers of Duns Scotus, and those opposed to his school of philosophy, Duns men became bigoted opponents of the new learning of that period, and therefore held by reformers to be incapable of scholarship and stupid, hence the word dunce. And how about this? Selling the Sultan's bathwater. Aga Sultan, the Sir Hamid Shah Aga Khan III, who at that time is, according to this book, or was, the leader of 12 million Shiite Mohammedans, is considered to be most holy by the devout followers of the Crescent. So much devotion do his followers show him that peddlers are able to sell spoonfuls of his bathwater on the streets. Crazy. Sultan's bathwater for sale. And this one, which actually escaped, I did a whole bunch of episodes on coincidences, but here's another extraordinary coincidence. On the 13th of February, 1746, a Frenchman by the name of Jean-Marie Dunbarry was brought to the scaffold for murdering his father. Precisely 100 years later, February 13th, 1846, another Frenchman by the name of Jean-Marie Dunbarry, the great-grandson of the other Dunbarry, was brought to the scaffold for a similar crime, murdering his father. Strange as it seems. And apparently a football game can be won by a score of 1-0 even after both teams have scored. Crazy. The best way to lose a football game by 1 point is apparently just to walk off the field. A team may be 17 touchdowns ahead, but should they get mad and refuse to play, the game is forfeited and the score reverts to 1-0. At the top of the episode, I asked if you could name the state that's named for Benjamin Franklin. Can you? I bet you can't. Here's why. The state of Franklin, now east of Tennessee, was named after the Philadelphia philosopher and existed for 4 years, from 1784 to 1788. The state came into being after the territory had been ceded to the federal government by North Carolina, of which then it formed a part. Inhabitants of the ceded area, aggrieved at the change, set up a state and asked Congress for admission to the Union. Congress declined, and North Carolina, enraged at the turn of events, attempted to resume control of the territory. And John Sevier served for 4 years as governor of the state of Franklin. His term was marked by constant strife. At the expiration of his term, North Carolina succeeded in gaining control of the territory, and Franklin ceased to exist. Strange as it seems. I covered this one in another episode, but it's still extraordinary. But did you know that George Washington was the 8th president? John Hix loved this fact. In fact, he carried it with him when he sold Strange as It Seems to all the various publications around the country and was basically building up the readership of Strange as It Seems. But the United States of America was formed under the Articles of Confederation, and John Hanson of Maryland was named President of the United States in Congress assembled 1781, while Washington was still in command of the Revolutionary forces, and 6 others were given the same title before Washington was duly elected to the presidency. And this is great. John Hix writes, "These facts are not altogether unknown, but when I printed the combined statement that Washington was the 8th president, and he also printed that he was born on February 11th, it started a deluge of letters, telegrams, and telephone calls that fairly swamped the Strange As It Seems studio. Editors of the various papers in which the feature Strange As It Seems appears were wiring and telephoning to obtain proof of the statements, that they might not lay themselves liable to the charge of printing false statements. Coming down to the office the day following the appearance of this cartoon, I found my desk literally buried under mail. All during that week, postmen kept returning to the office with armfuls of letters, the burden of which was that the writers felt the author should consult an alienist. This from the Strange As It Seems book from 1931. And this strange coincidence, which I actually, about 12, 13 years ago, actually grabbed this from this book and made an entire Strange As It Seems webisode about. Pretty much the strangest coincidence ever recorded. But on December 5th, 1664, a boat was sunk while crossing the Menai Strait. Out of 81 passengers, only one survived. His name was Hugh Williams. And on December 5th, 1785, another boat was sunk under similar conditions. There were 60 passengers, and of this number, only one survived, and his name was Hugh Williams. And on August 5th, 1820, another such accident was recorded in English newspapers. This time, 25 passengers on board the sunken ship, and only one man survived. His name was Hugh Williams. And I didn't put this in the episode, but on each of these boats sank on the 5th of the month. Strange as it seems. Here's another fact I mentioned at the top of the hour, but Charlemagne held the throne for 400 years? Crazy. First to the Holy Roman Emperors. Charlemagne was placed in a sitting position on a marble throne when he died. And this was in the year 814. Fully dressed in imperial robes with a crown on his head, scepter in his hand, sword by his side, and the Gospels lying open on his lap. His body remained in an upright sitting position for 400 years. When removed from the throne in 1215 by Frederick II, Charlemagne's body was found to be in a wonderful state of preservation. Frederick had the dead emperor's body put in a casket of gold and silver, which was placed in the cathedral at Aix-la-Chapelle. The throne upon which Charlemagne sat was used as a throne at the coronation of the German emperors all the way until 1558, at which time the coronation city was changed to Frankfurt. Strange as it seems. And several of these facts appeared in the Strange as it seems radio shows of the 1930s, including this one, which is available. I have a Strange as it seems classics playlist that has several of the Columbia films, as well as many of the radio shows from the 1930s that were on CBS radio. But this one included was about how America was named by a German professor in a French school for an Italian navigator in the service of the King of Portugal. Incredible story about Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci, who had discovered essentially South America. He said he found what might be called the New World, since the ancients had maintained there were no continents below the equator. So, incredible story of Amerigo Vespucci. Again, check it out below in the classic radio shows from the 1930s. How about this gruesome one? General Sang-Chi buried alive 100,000 captive soldiers at once. Yikes. Or how about this one? There was a Queen of England who was never in England. Crazy. Queen Berengaria. She was the wife of Richard the Lionhearted. She never set foot on English soil. King Richard left England in 1190 on his third crusade, and he met Berengaria, the daughter of Sancho VI of Navarre, in Italy. They were married in Cyprus, May 12, 1191. Queen Berengaria saw Richard once later in the same year, and once again in 1195. During all Richard's wanderings, she lived in Italy and France. In her declining years, she resided chiefly at Le Mans, France, where she died about 1230, without ever seeing England, the country of which she was queen. And here's one of the facts that ended up in the Columbia films, which we have below, about little Jack Horner. There really was. He was a real boy. The famous nursery rhyme character, Little Jack Horner, who sat in a corner eating his Christmas pie, was a real boy. He lived in the Abbey of Glastonbury, England, in the time of Henry VIII. If you want more on that story, check out the Little Jack Horner Strange as It Seems classic film below in the YouTube channel playlist called Strange as It Seems Classics. And here's an amazing football player, John Ginger, of Sutherland, Iowa. He played football for 20 years, which is amazing in and of itself. Think of like George Blanda, who played for like 26 seasons, who finished up on the Oakland Raiders, my favorite team. But there are other football players who played for longer, but the amazing thing about John Ginger, he played football for 20 years without missing 1 minute of play. Strange as it seems. And another fact in the Strange as It Seems first edition book that also ended up as a radio show is the Singing River of Mississippi. It produces really mysterious harp-like music. For more of that story, check out that radio show episode below in Strange as It Seems Classics as well. And one of these days, I'll get to the files on boxing. My great-uncle John Hix and my grandfather Ernest loved boxing. There are massive amounts of files and facts on the sport of boxing, but here's the great fighter Jack Dempsey. He knocked out 4 men in 1 round, each on the same day, and 4 days later, knocked out 4 more, February 8th and 12th in 1926. But during the time he was champion, Dempsey fought only 138 total minutes. Isn't that incredible? And over that, he made $2,137,000. This is in the 1920s. Over about $15,000 a minute boxing, the great Jack Dempsey. And of course, the fact I grabbed for the very first video I made in this brand new series, if you go all the way back, but ice skaters do not skate on ice. Each year, thousands of people go ice skating, yet not one of them, nor has anybody else, ever skated on ice. Here's a simple explanation, backed up by the Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C. The weight of a person upon the narrow steel runners causes the ice underneath the skates to melt due to the pressure upon it, even though the temperature may be below the freezing point. So the ice skater really moves upon a film of water. As soon as the pressure of the skate is removed, the water quickly freezes again. This is called regulation. Strange as it seems. And how about this one? A farmer who was son of a president and also father of a president. You ever heard the story of John Scott Harrison? He was an Indiana farmer, had the unique distinction of being the son of a president of the United States and the father of a president of the United States. He was the son of William Henry Harrison, who was the 9th president, and the father of Benjamin Harrison, who was the 23rd president. He was born in Vincennes, Indiana in 1804 and died in 1878 on Point Farm, near North Bend, Ohio, where President Benjamin Harrison was born. And the final one I'll pick out today from the Strange as It Seems book, and I have it all scanned in, so at some point I'll upload all of these facts somewhere. We'll create some kind of archives, I think, on the website one of these days. But I love this one because it's about Charlie Chaplin, who was actually acting at the time this book was published, but he wore the same pair of shoes in every picture he ever made. Crazy story about Charlie Chaplin. Well, that does it for this episode of Strange as It Seems, based on the first collection of greatest hits by John Hix in his book first published in 1928, the second edition in 1931, of all the greatest stories of the early years of Strange as It Seems. If you like stories like this about the strange and unusual, vintage comic strips, vintage film, vintage radio shows, and such, please click the bell to subscribe. Drop me a line, leave a comment, and join me next week for another episode of Strange as It Seems.